the connection with GMOs and RoundUp and cancer?
All right. So when we surveyed 3,256 people, what have you noticed you got better from when you switched to non-GMO, and they also reported largely organic? 155 people reported showing improvements in cancer. Now, 81% of those was either significant improvement, nearly gone, or completely recovered. Now, that's anecdotal evidence. Fine. Now, let me share my screen. And I'm going to share it in this mode so you can see the stuff on the left side too. Okay, hospital discharge diagnosis of breast cancer. Here's the glyphosate usage on GMO soy and corn.
Wow.
Here's the breast cancer rising. The R value is, the correlation coefficient is 0.9375. If it were a perfect correlation, it would be 1. Now, this does not guarantee causation. This is correlation, but we have other evidence suggesting that there's causation here. So this is breast cancer hospital diagnosis showing a dramatic increase, rising in parallel over the increased use of glyphosate on soy and corn. Here is kidney and renal pelvic cancer. This is both the glyphosate and the percentage of crops, percentage of GMO soy and corn compared to the total soy and corn acreage. Here is thyroid cancer. This is age adjusted, so it shows a trend that could have happened had it not been introduced. Big deal. This is deaths due to acute myeloid leukemia, and those are just some of them. So
Wow.
That's some of the cancers. We also have other cancers that we're not going to share now. So what's causing this? In the RoundUp trials, they had world experts in the causes of cancer, showing that glyphosate causes genotoxicity, mutations in the DNA, in the genome, which can be linked to cancer, causes oxidative stress, which can link to genotoxicity. But we also know, and this was not necessarily brought out in the trial, but we bring it out in our lectures and materials, that there's leaky gut. If you look under a microscope at the human epithelial cells, which line the gut, and you put in some glyphosate, they separate. And that separation, leaky gut, is linked to cancer, but virtually every disease. There's actually a peer-reviewed published study by a Harvard professor that said leaky gut is the cause of all disease. Cancer is one of those. We also have the microbiome. The microbiome, changes in the microbiome are precursors to about 80% of all human diseases, including cancers. And when you look at the changes in the human gut, as Kiran Krishnan did, and I interviewed him about this, and I said, okay, can the changes that you're seeing resulting in the human gut model from glyphosate, can that lead to cancer? And how? And he explained the lack of diversity, the improvement, the increase in these bad actors, the reduction of the good actors, the short chain fatty acid change, and all this stuff. He said, yeah, these can lead to cancer. And another friend of mine, some friends that work over at Mara Labs that produce broccoli, they did a study on the intercellular communication. It's called gap junctions. This is not the tight junctions in the gut. This is just how cells communicate. And it dropped by 50%.
Wow.
And that's linked to cancer. Then you look at the mitochondria. Now there's a Nobel Prize winner that has a mitochondria theory of cancer. A lot of people think it's very related to cancer. It's related to aging. It's related to all these other things. And it's damaged with glyphosate. I talked to Zach Bush, who looks under a microscope at the glyphosate, at the mitochondria, puts a little drop of glyphosate in, it collapses. The structural integrity in the cell is held together by this certain property or compound, and that gets destroyed, and that's needed to hold the integrity of the mitochondria in place, and they get destroyed. So there's all sorts of ways in which glyphosate may cause cancer. Then you have GMOs. They took rats and fed them Roundup ready soy that had been sprayed with Roundup. And they fed it to them for 2 years, and they had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. They fed one group just the Roundup in the water supply without the GMOs. They had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. So we might conclude, aha, it's the Roundup after all. But another group had the Roundup ready corn that had never been sprayed with Roundup. And they had multiple massive tumors, early death, and organ damage. So whether it's GMOs or Roundup individually or together, multiple massive tumors. And the tumors grew to like 25% of the body weight. Then they had to kill the animals because at that point it was like, there's laws about this. I've seen massive tumors in other animals that have been fed Roundup ready soy by someone at the Russian Academy of Science. I've heard all sorts of things. So yeah, there's all sorts of links. And the tightest set of data, because of the ways the experiments have been done, is non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then there's a bunch on acute myeloid leukemia and also breast cancer. With breast cancer, there's other elements in the blood that if they're there with glyphosate, it promotes the growth of breast cancer cells. So they did this study on breast cancer cells, and they found that without this other element that's almost always in the blood, it didn't promote the cancer cells, but when the other element was there, it promoted cancer cells. There was another study which was not replicable, but parts per trillion of glyphosate promoted growth of cancer cells. Now, what's interesting also is that glyphosate as an antibiotic, it kills beneficial gut bacteria. The microbiome is really critical for human health, but it also helps in healing. So if you have a breast tumor, there's a certain migration of a type of bacteria that go into the breast, and they thought, oh, this is a problem, and they killed it, and it was metastasized, it spread. The bacteria actually protect against the spread. But if you're destroying the gut bacteria or the body's microbiome, then some of the healing mechanisms might not work as well. So these are just a little bit. And here's another one. The glyphosate blocks detoxification in at least 2 ways, the liver and the cell. By blocking the P450 cytochrome pathway enzymes, that's a technical term, in the liver, it means all of the other toxins that are normally released through the body, through the liver, can be hanging around, wreaking havoc. It also can mess up the kidneys, which is another detoxifier. And every cell has an NRF2 detoxification pathway, and that was dropped by, I think, 30%, according to my friends who I interviewed. And that means that it's like the king of all toxins. All the other environmental toxins that would normally be ushered out through these pathways get to hang around, and some of them are carcinogenic. So I think we beat that cancer horse.
Yeah.
We beat that. We're done with that one.
We understand why it causes cancer on many levels.
Yeah.
Now, I know one of your lectures, The Truth About Cancer, you went beyond the genetically modified food. You went into fish and how they're actually genetically modifying living animals.
Salmon, mosquitoes, microbes. Yeah. So DNA can be manipulated through genetic engineering. And scientists who are not so enlightened think that, but maybe very well-meaning, may think, oh, let's do something to improve nature or to make nature more compatible with industrial agriculture. So they've created salmon, genetically engineered to grow very quickly. And rather than getting into the details, there's links to the possible connection to cancer and hormonal problems and others. And it was approved with very meager evidence by the USDA, and it could be on the marketplace in restaurants soon in the United States. It was already available in restaurants and catering institutions in Canada for a while. I'm not sure if it's currently in Canada, but it's a problem. There's mosquito.
So if people eat wild caught?
safe.
Is that, they
Safe.
can still be,
No.
no, they're
Wild
not.
caught. These are only grown in tanks
Farm,
inland, not even in offshore farms. That could be a disaster because the study showed that a similar genetically engineered fast-growing salmon created by Canadian scientists, when it was put into tanks with other GMO frankenfish or non-GMO natural fish, when they turned down the amount of food, because these fast-growing salmon are voraciously hungry to support their growth, they started attacking and killing and eating their competitors, causing population crashes and extinctions. So it's possible that if they were released into the environment, it could end the population of salmon. Or the salmon could be like roving bands of mutant gangs to kill other fish because they're ravenously hungry. So it's a nightmare. There's also genetically engineered mosquitoes that were released in Florida. They want to release them in California. Very, very dangerous in our opinion. And what's most dangerous actually are the microbes. I'll tell you a story. People can watch the excerpt of this there's a 16-minute film called Don't Let the Gene Out of the Bottle at protectnaturenow.com. And at protectnaturenow.com, it shows up right there. I highly recommend looking at it because of all the things that can go wrong with GMOs, the microbes are the most serious. And this is an example that makes it crystal clear. So the scientists have this brilliant idea of taking a microbe that exists everywhere they've looked for it in soil, right next to the roots. And they said, great, this lives in soil, so it will survive. They needed microbe that would survive in soil. Let's genetically engineer it so that it transforms plant cells into alcohol. And we'll give it to farmers who will put the bacteria into these large vats with their crop residues that they normally burn, which doesn't help anyone. Put them into the vats with the bacteria and wait 2 weeks. And now it's turned all those crop residues into alcohol. You can run your tractors on it. You can sell it off farm for extra money, and then take the nutrient-rich sludge at the bottom and spread it on the fields as fertilizer. So from a limited perspective, it checked all the boxes. When they presented the microbes to the EPA said, okay, do all these tests. They did all the tests and passed. No problem. 2 weeks before they were planning to release it, a graduate student who happened to want to do research on GMO microbes for his PhD and got permission, went into his lab and found that all of the wheat plants that had been growing in the soil that were mixed with this microbe had died. The microbe turned the roots and then the plants into alcohol, and he had basically slime instead of plants.
No.
Now, if it had been released, it might have spread. And it might have spread around the world. I mean, we didn't need a pandemic to know that bacteria spread around the world. You'll see in the film, Don't Let the Gene Out of the Bottle, there was a secret alleged study by the EPA that showed GMO microbes will travel around the world. So if it had been released, and just suppose that it displaced its natural parent counterpart, which is not hard to imagine because its natural counterpart would die in the presence of alcohol, and the GMO doesn't. So it might go like, okay, you're out of here, you're out of here. And it's around every single root in every single soil tested everywhere on Earth. It could have theoretically, and I asked the graduate student's advisor, Dr. Elaine Ingham, what might have happened if this were released. And she said, should I tell? I better, plot spoiler. Said, it could end terrestrial plant life on Earth. That's one microbe released with good intentions, just doing what it was planning to do better than was thought about by the scientists. when you genetic engineer something, whether you're using the traditional or gene editing, you create massive collateral damage in the DNA. So it might be doing a dozen other things that it was never intended to do. But it doesn't stop there. Once you release it, we know from the pandemic, you may get mutations. So now it's doing something that you never intended. But you don't necessarily know that microbes go to big swap meets. And just like kids playing Dungeons and Dragons with their cards, they swap genes back and forth and look for some kind of survival advantage. So you genetically engineer one thing to turn cells into alcohol, and now that's in 1,000 other types of microbes, including possibly in our bodies. So you release one set of GMO microbes, and it may end up around the world in 10,000 different ecosystems, damaging or collapsing them. And now gene editing is so cheap and easy, you can buy a do-it-yourself kit online for $169, and for about a $1,000 or $2,000 lab, you can create all sorts of combinations of GMO microbes every day, each for about the price of dinner, and the price is coming down, and you can take them for a walk after dinner, and now you've created an environmental release that will never be reversed. If that survives, if it has a survival advantage, you've changed the nature of nature. Now multiply that by all the home hobbyists, all the high school laboratories using CRISPR, all the commercial laboratories, all the college laboratories, and you end up with 1 million new microbes over the next generation. And what did we say earlier about the microbiome? It is critical for human health, but it's also critical for environmental health. What happens if it messes up the ability of